whether they are able to complete a task or acquire the skill. It's that they start the context for understanding what they're capable of. And how do we work on this? Well, we promote the cognitive skills that are age appropriate, and through emerging curriculum, we're able to work on the things that the kids are doing in terms of their own personal development. And like we learned from Vygotsky, learning and development are incredibly linked and symbiotic to each other. And so we need to break down the different types of learning kids need in their lives, comparing and contrasting, putting things into different groups, float or sink, hard or soft, sticky or wet or dry. Quantifying activities. So in dealing with early learners, we all know that worksheets and abstract ideas of math are not going to work. And it's because we first need to work on the ability to quantify things. Now in the picture here, this was actually really fun. I wrote a number on the board, 8. And they had to work together as a group to get blocks from the middle of the floor and only have 8 blocks on their table. And I watched as child after child scooped up as many blocks as they could put inside their shirts, and then they dump them out on the table. And slowly they start to realize, not only did they have to work together as a team, but to understand the concept of what that meant to only have 8 blocks or only have 6 blocks. And this isn't the only example. I'm sure in our classrooms, we all use tangible objects as the context for quantifying things. And this is one of the incredibly important cognitive development, one of the incredibly important cognitive tools that we can use to boost learning. Putting things in sequences. For example, the life cycle of a frog or the life cycle of a plant. Building on spatial relationships, giving kids the first interaction with their ability to not only create the relationship between them and the world, but be able to manage it. And in this picture, you can see they had to create their own map. We can also do this with giving directions or asking kids to find things. Another one is describing and remembering. And I think this is one of the most important cognitive skills because this is documenting what we know and what we've learned is for critical thinking, how we move on to the next step. And so first, we started out by classifying all the different materials in the picture on the left as wet, dry, or sticky. So we did an experiment. I don't know if any of you have done this before, but we mixed water and cornstarch together, and it's amazing. It's a magical transformation, and it turns into a messy classroom. It's actually quite magical. And you can see that's where the janitor part comes in. And we can see on the right, we see they get the chance to apply the knowledge that they're given. They have the chance to not only work out these labels and these identifiers by themselves, but also to mix as much as they wanted together. And that plethora of materials and that plethora of choice is what gives them the knowledge that they're able to make these decisions by themselves and make these experiments how they view the world. Planning and predicting. Here again, back to the plants. First, they had to draw the plants as they were right then. And then they had to draw the plants as they thought they would be. And of course, the second pictures on the right were full of scribbles of purple crown and pictures of smiley faces. And I think one kid even drew a scary alien. But this gives kids the first chance to express what they think the future is going to be. And I think that when we give kids the chance to predict their own future, even if they're wrong, especially if they're wrong, and still assign value to that, is how we let kids know that their ideas about the future are important too. And without kids being able to understand, being able to move on to the future and thinking of what comes next, by promoting that, we allow them the opportunity to dream. Problem number 4. Dissociative literacy. Now this is literacy that focuses on ability as a passive function with little engagement. Now this is one thing I know personally I do communicate to my parents, and I'm sure all of you do as well. Reading a book is not reading a book. The book itself is not important. The story is important. Not just because of the story, but how it applies to their lives. And so promoting critical literacy is very important. And I think if you asked me when I was a kid or before, when I was in high school, I think if you would ask most people, they would say that literacy is reading. But of course we know that literacy is much more complicated than that. It's not just reading a book. It's engaging with that language to acquire and construct meaning and use that to apply in all different aspects of their lives. And as we go into this, we need to define literacy not as the reading of books, but as the processing of media. And especially in the world that our kids are growing up into is increasingly important for how they're going to be interacting on YouTube by themselves. I think in the presentation before this one, it was talked about how every single kid at a restaurant has an iPad now while the parents talk. And I think that we've all seen that scene. And we may even see it in our classrooms with our kids and the things that they consume. And so by building up the idea that there's not just one literacy, there's multiple literacies. And by applying that inside of our classrooms, we give children the power to use the media not as a tool to capture their attention in a short-sighted way, but as a tool to boost their learning. And so what are some different types of literacy? Well, of course, there's reading books. There's also watching a movie. I get parents who ask me sometimes, Isaac, I noticed you were watching a movie in class the other day. Why were you watching a movie? Well, I said, well, we weren't really watching a movie. We were watching about 10 seconds, stopping it, and then asking questions. Okay, so this man, is he a bad man? Is he a good man? You think he's happy? Are you happy? Did you ever have this happen to you? What would you do if this happened to you? What would you do if this happened to mommy or daddy? Do you think that this is funny? Do you think that this is something that you would like to do in your life? And by building up those questions, we promote the ability for kids to link what happens at home and what happens at school with all the different contexts of how we interact with media. And this gets us into the idea of third space theory. Now, third space theory is a theory that we can all apply inside of our classrooms in how we view the importance of reading. Again, it is not the ability to read, but the ability to construct meaning that applies to our lives and our students' lives. And so there's the first space, which is home and family. And the second space, which is community environments and school. And then there's the third space. And third space is that internal space within ourselves that we use to link our different environments of community and family and self. And be able to link the things that we see through books, through media, and be able to link that to our lives and continuously ask questions. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little fast here at the end because I can see I am running out of time, but this is something that as we read books, as we consume media with kids, and especially in an increasingly digitalized age, our kids need to be prepared for this because there is such a wealth of knowledge to be gained from all of these different types of literacies. And the more that we empower kids to do that and think critically, we allow them the most powerful tool in emerging curriculum, which is the ability to investigate for themselves and ask their own questions. Now, I'm going to get into our last problem, which is curriculum that is oversaturated on accomplishments and gives kids little chance to reinforce acquired knowledge through practice. And the answer for this, of course, is to promote play. Every single person that I've listened to today has at some point talked about this and the importance that it has. And it's not just play, as we all know. It's structured, it's important, and it has its uses for reinforcing the things that kids are dealing with and learning inside the classroom. And there are different types of play. Before our play, we can establish goals and problems. In this top left picture and the bottom right picture, we see the kids playing with blocks. I gave them the problem to make a town. And we talked about all the different things that make up a town or a community. Police station, school, houses. And they got to choose what they wanted to do. In the top right corner, we see the kids building a tower. We were learning about mountains. And the kids, I told them, you think it's easy to be a tall mountain? All right, I want you to build a mountain as tall as Mount Everest. And they sure tried, and I think the tower you see there is about the highest they could get. And then on the bottom left picture, we see a bunch of food. I told them, well, you know what? It's almost Thanksgiving. We need a Thanksgiving meal. Who wants to be the mom? Who wants to be the dad? Who's going to cook this? Make a Thanksgiving meal. Here's the tools. You guys do it. And I didn't give them any answers, and I didn't give them any roles. They had to decide all that by themselves, and by giving them the context to be able to have that agency, we are able to empower our kids to know that they can step into these roles. These don't exist outside them. They exist within them and all the possibilities they're able to do. Also making tools that they're going to play with. Making a compass that they get to play around with in the park. Making drums that they get to have free time to experiment with music. Making tools out of clay or Play-Doh and allowing them to use that as part of their imaginative process. Make-believe, as we also know, is one of the main parts of this age of learning, is being able to assume the roles that adults occupy as well, and in some cases, dogs, and being able to do those things for themselves and start to internalize that knowledge of cultural concepts. And lastly, and most important, is free play and expression. And knowing that throughout the day, we need to give kids time to express themselves through free play. Because if we're ever going to promote emerging curriculum in our classrooms, if we're ever going to understand what the kids want to do, we have to give them the freedom to explore themselves, their own agency, and what learning means to them. Now, as a final thought, I'd like to give a quote from Stacia Towser, which is, we worry so much what a child will become tomorrow, yet we forget that they are someone today. Now, in talking about critical thinking, the most involved part of the brain, which has to deal with the decision-making process, is the frontal lobe, which is in its main developmental phases early on as babies, and is still growing as we go through the early stages of education. And we also know that cortisol, which is the hormone released because of stress, affects the frontal lobe and affects the ability to not only make decisions, but also it affects the size of the frontal lobe itself. And so by giving kids the room to be creative, the room to think critically and for themselves, we allow them the opportunity not just to grow to their full potential, but to be able to healthily and symbiotically influence the creation of their own minds. And I want to say that all of us as educators are incredibly experienced with all of these issues. We all know the potential of our students. And when our students ask the question, why? It's something that we can encourage inside of them to be able to promote their own agency and expand their awareness of self and expand their ability to be able to process all the stimuli that they're receiving and be able to use that to link the concepts as they apply to themselves, and to know that it's okay to fail and it's okay to go through a process of learning. And for us to understand kids, we need to be able to deconstruct all the different issues that young learners are going through. And as we promote those issues in our classrooms, and as we promote critical thinking, I know that we are creating a better world for tomorrow and creating a better world for our kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisc, for the presentation. Now we will have the coffee break in the Aisc handout section. And Andrew will guide all of you to proceed here. And also, the next section will begin at 2:45. Please enjoy your time and see you later.